All right. So in this demonstration, we're going to look at today for Blender. We're going to look at tools and operations, so that's your second exercise. This video will be a collection of videos, so it'll probably be 3 separate videos. The first one we're going to do will be talking about some of the different modes that you can use in Blender, like Edit and Sculpt. So we'll explore some of the options that you can do and adjust your model with based on those. We'll also look at some specific objects that you can add to the scene to make other manipulated forms beyond just the basic objects that we can add to a scene. And then in the final video, we'll talk about modifiers and how to use sort of Blender's 3D filtering tools to help modify and shape the way that we work with a model. So all of these exercises, again, are all about adjusting your model, modifying its form to bring it into the place where you want it to look before we start changing color and adding textures to the surface. That's what this whole exercise is about. All right, so let's get started with modes. And really, before I can do that, I need to go ahead and import my scene. So I'm going to go ahead and go up to File, and I'm going to open and locate where my scene is. And I've got my file open. And again, just as based on last time, we positioned our model into 3D space, working with the interface. We rotated it and scaled it to where it would fit on top of the little grid stage that we have inside of Blender. And it's important that your model is located on top of that. For all intents and purposes, while designing inside of 3D software, is being able to locate the center or the origin point of 3D space in a software program for 3D modeling. And ours is at the center intersection of this grid where the red and the green line cross each other. Outside of that, there's no way to really locate a model accurately or quickly. Also, whenever you're exporting models out of the software, it will use the location of your model based on its distance from that origin point to reposition it in another program that you would open it in. So it's important that it's located over the top of that. All right, so I'm going to turn my cyclorama back on. And in here again, we've got preferences rigged for working in Blender to more accurately use our mouse tools. So my left and right buttons work actively. I have also activated the middle mouse button on my mouse. The MMB is also a shortcut for middle mouse button that's used a lot. But what that allows me to do inside of Blender is that I can click on my middle mouse button and drag inside the interface to freely orbit around in a very smooth fashion around my scene. Middle mouse button will orbit, but around the center of the viewport that is one of your user perspectives. It will not do it if you're in quad view. It will not do free roam around inside of one of your locked angled views. So top orthographic, front orth, and right ortho. You can't use the middle mouse button to click and drag the scene around. You still have to use combinations of the shift and mouse wheel or control and the mouse wheel to move those scenes around specifically. But in your user perspective window, you can click and drag with the middle mouse if you have middle mouse functionality turned on to be able to orbit your scene freely. And that's a very handy feature to use inside of Blender. All right. So we're going to start off by identifying some of the different modes in here. So to find our modes, we're going to go down to our lower 3D menu below our viewports. And the mode that we currently have set down below is object mode, is what it says down there. And it's denoted by a little orange cube icon next to that term. So we're going to switch from object mode, and we're going to go and explore 2 other modes today. And that's really all we're going to explore. So you have some other things to play with. So we're going to go into edit mode next. So switch from object to edit. And what you should notice when you switch between the two is that whatever element you currently have selected on screen is going to be converted into a orange outlined or orange highlighted form. Now in my screen, I had my character selected in object mode, and so when I switched into edit mode, that character was still selected, but what it shows you when you're selected, and you can zoom in on your character to see what's going on, what it shows that's selected is actually all of the polygon structure that makes up your model. So that's what you're seeing. If you zoom in on it, you can start to see all of these crazy details across the surface. Now I'm actually going to switch out of quad mode for now, guys, and just leave it in normal user perspective. So I'm just going to switch that off. I'm going to go to View, Toggle Quad. And that way I can sort of fill my screen with my model. It's a little easier to look at that way. Okay. So again, what we're seeing when we've got edit mode on is the ability to select all of the pieces of our model at any given time, or any of the individual chunks. Now the human scan that we have is very detailed, you may notice, based on all the little teeny tiny triangles that make up the surface of the model. So this is a highly detailed mesh, very detailed. But here are some things that we can do in edit mode. First, to call it out, edit mode is really great for specific editing, fine-tune edits of individual polygons or groups of polygons. It's a great way for deleting polygon groups and cleaning up your model, essentially is what you get to do in this mode. So let me show you some examples of how that might work out. So here's how we can play with this particular mode. I want to identify a few things from the bottom menu. If you notice when you switch to edit mode, your 3D menu changes a little bit. And some of the file options that you have while you're in edit mode down here also change, as well as some of the buttons that we have access to. So there are 3 new buttons down here that I want to identify. The 3 of them specifically are these 3 little gray cube icons right here just past your little widget options. So right past where it says global, you should see 3 little lined up cubes. And these are specific selection cubes. So they allow you to select specific design elements or polygon elements. So the first little square, or the first little cube, has a round orange dot. That's for vertex selection. So if I come out to my model and I click on any of these little intersection points between my my polygons, where any number of lines, at least it should be at least 3 or more lines intersect, there's a dot, right? That's a vertex. And so in vertex selection, I can only select those items. See that? Of course, you see whenever I select it, it gives you the widget popped up on it. So the cool thing is I can grab it and pull it out. Pretty wild, huh? So that's part of what edit mode allows you to do, is fine-tune edits, right? But this is vertex selection. Now, another thing to realize in edit mode is that you have access to be able to multi-select if you want to. So if you need to grab more than one piece, you can do that while you're here by holding down Shift and clicking on other vertex pieces on your model. Now go ahead and try it out. Click on one vertex on your model and then work on holding down Shift to grab multiple pieces on a part of it. Now I'm working on the top of my model, mostly because I know that I can drag these pieces straight up with my widget if I need to. If you're clicking and dragging, if you're clicking and selecting on the side of your model, you may have to grab with a different axis on your widget to pull it towards you because of the angle of 3D space that these are represented in. And remember, if you want to scroll up and down on your model, just hold down Shift to roll up and down with your mouse wheel. Or if you need to go side to side, hold down Control and roll your mouse wheel instead.
How do you, when you want to rotate? I want to rotate the model.
Yeah, if you want to spin around a little bit, you can try doing the orbit thing with the middle mouse button like we talked about. So just click and hold on your mouse wheel in your viewport, and then you can drag your scene around a little bit.
Even if I'm in edit mode.
But if you need to rotate your model itself, then you may need to switch back to object mode,
Okay.
and then come out here and rotate it. Now, I would recommend if you're going to rotate it around, I would do that from a top view. So I would switch to quad mode and probably open up your top view in there, and then I would rotate from the top view so that it spins in place and it doesn't free spin in other directions.
My edit mode isn't letting me click anything.
Say that again?
My edit mode isn't letting me click anything.
Yeah, edit mode is all based on what model you actually have selected right now.
Oh, so that's selected. Then
So if you didn't select one in object mode specifically,
Yeah.
then it won't be able to use that model in edit mode.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you got to tell it before you go in. That's part of the trick of working in it, is it is sensitive to whatever's currently active on screen. All right. So back in edit mode. Okay, so again, you can use things like Shift to grab multiple pieces if you want to. Obviously, if you're still holding Shift, you can re-click on those pieces to remove them from your selection. Works just as well. Another nifty thing that we have access to when we're in edit mode is the selection tool. Besides just direct clicking on individual points with the mouse, we can actually use the selection tool to paint over an area to grab an entire group of pieces of polygons. So if you want to do that while we're in here, go back down to your 3D menu and click on Select. And there are two controllers listed down there for making selections. One of them is called Circle Select, and the other is called Border Select. Circle Select is a little more natural. This is like painting with a brush onto your model to get the parts you want. So I'm going to show you that one. I'm going to click on it. And again, I'm doing this with just one main viewer. It does work a little bit more smoothly when you're in one main viewer. But when I come out, I've got a little white circle around my mouse. And what I can do, based on the model that's active in edit mode, I can just click and drag and paint in a region to make a selection on screen. Now, if you paint over enough vertex points that are next to each other, it will select all of them to make a full polygon or set of polygons. You can also roll your mouse wheel to make your selection circle bigger. If it's too small, it's really hard for you to make selections. I'm just going to warn you. So use that wheel, make it big enough to grab as much as you want. So again, I'm just kind of carefully using this tool. That's what edit mode is about, is careful edits, specific edits. But once you grab them all like that, then the cool thing is now we can do something else with it. To deactivate the tool, hit Escape. And you have to do that, by the way, or it won't let you do anything else in Blender. So always hit Escape when you're done making a selection. And now, if you use the widget, you can actually click and drag that entire group to manipulate your form. Depending on whatever widget mode you currently have turned on down on the bottom of the screen. Again, you may have the blue arrow, the blue arc, or you may have the blue scaling icon turned on, and those will all change the way that your widget works. Okay, so that's kind of working with basic vertex selection. If you don't want it to be so pointed and just having individual vertex selection active, if you need bigger pieces, we can use one of these other little gray cubes on your menu bar down here to select with. So that was vertex select, was the first gray cube. The second gray cube, if you click on that, it has a little orange line on it instead. And make sure you deactivate your brush tool before you go too far. There you go. But yeah, if you click on the line select or edge select, now it will only allow you to click on the individual lines that go between points. And again, you can hold down Shift to add these little lines together so that you can select more than one as you go. And if you pull these out, if you try to move these, it's kind of weird, but it'll literally grab them just based on wherever they're connected on the model. So it doesn't pull up a whole polygon, it might just pull up the edges around one instead. So it looks a little different whenever you manipulate with that specific selection. The last little cube on here is for faces. So if you click on the last cube, it shows a solid square, orange square. You should notice that your model changes, and it has little dots at the center of every polygon. And that just shows you where you're allowed to click. So if you click on one of those dots on one of those polygons on screen, or very close to it, you can select an entire polygon and manipulate that form. And again, you can also use the selection tools like Circle Select to just paint in polygons that you want to work with. Now always remember when you're working with the selector tool to always deactivate it with escape when you're done with it. Otherwise you'll get really frustrated with Blender in about 5 seconds or less. But that's face selection. Another thing we can do with those little selection options is we can actually turn multiple ones on by holding Shift and clicking on each of these little gray cubes down here. And then what that does is that just allows you to select more than one kind of an element at a time. So if you click on a vertex, it'll only grab the vertex. If you click on an entire polygon center, it'll grab the whole polygon center. Or you can select on a line. And so all of those things become available whenever you have all 3 of these activated with Shift. All right. So those are those little guys. You get those whenever you turn on edit mode. Some other fun things that we get whenever we turn on edit mode are over here in our tool tab on the left-hand side of the screen. So I'm just gonna take a look at that next. So on your vertical tabs, and the first one for tools, there are a few things in here I want to outline that are new for edit mode. So the first one that's kind of new is underneath the transform section of tools. And the 2 new ones you have are shrink and flatten and push and pull. These are actually kind of cool. So I'm going to just select on my model real quick with face selection mode. I'm going to grab a face on it. And first off, I'm going to pull that piece out like this. So I'm just going to use my widget and grab the blue arrow to pull it straight up since I'm on top of my model. If you're on the side of your model with a polygon on a side, use the appropriate axis arrow that points out into space away from that side of your model. But I'm just going to pull this little section out. And the first one is called shrink flatten. So if you turn that on from the button menu on transform, you can drag your mouse to make that piece go up and down. So it's not really that fancy, but it is strictly locked along a path, so it won't shrink and flatten in any other direction. It'll only go up and down. And then push and pull is kind of cool because what it actually does is taper the shape. So it'll shrink it or grow it in place. So watch what I do whenever I have push and pull active on the same little polygon. Let me zoom back in here. By the way, you can actually get closer to your model if you turn off, if you switch from perspective viewing to orthographic viewing by hitting number 5 on your number pad. That'll just remove all the visual distortion out of the model. And always make sure when you use those number pad keys that your mouse is inside your viewport. Otherwise it won't work. All right, so anyway, got that on. I'm gonna use push-pull. Clicked it and drag your mouse. And if I drag my mouse up and down, what it does is that you can convert the selected polygons into a point. Like you can sort of drag it and it'll shrink it to where all the little vertex points come together. And if you push it too far, they'll invert. But you can also push it in the opposite direction to where it widens the size of that polygon. It does not move the polygon up and down. It keeps it exactly where it was originally located, but it allows you to change its scale overall with push-pull. That's kind of a fun feature to play with. All right. Some of the other fun ones you have listed in here are things like, if you come down below that, there's a section called Mesh Tools. And under Mesh Tools, there's one here that's kind of quirky called Randomize. So if you have on screen like several different polygons maybe selected, if you hit Randomize a bunch, it will try, what it basically does is that it starts changing the transformation properties of those objects and in a random fashion. Go ahead and pull them out of your object with like your widget. So just kind of pull them away and then try using Randomize. And the more you use Randomize, the more weird and misshapen those polygons become. It can get really random on giant objects or simple objects as well. But that's kind of a fun one sometimes to play off of. All right, so that's Randomize. Now, some of the other ones in here that are kind of interesting, if you go down to the Add Command section, the first one on here that's really fun and useful is Extrude. So select a polygon on your screen that you can see. So I'm going to grab this one right here. And then I'm going to hit Extrude over here, the black button Extrude. And I'm going to extrude, just hit Region. And then slide your mouse out after you click that button. And it will extend your shape into space. Now you may have to, depending on the side of your object you're on, you may have to move your mouse up and down or left and right to get it to pop out more effectively. But that is what Extrude does. It literally takes and extends that polygon out into space. And so you can get kind of interesting extensions that you can build on your model with a tool like that. So if I extend it this way and then click and release, then the extrusion is done. I can then select any other faces and do another extrude. Extrude is also the shortcut E on your keyboard. And then I can pop out another section. Just going to recenter on my object here. Or I can go over here and I can hit E again and pop out this section. And you can start creating very unique kind of blocky forms. They don't have to be blocky because remember, if you can select something and it shows the widget, you can also scale it or twist it. So if I hit S for scale right now, I can shrink or grow that polygon. Or if I hit rotate, I can spin it and change the direction that it's going to shoot out the next extension. Until I can make something very interesting very quickly. And so you can keep going and doing crazy stuff like that pretty much all day. But that is kind of a unique feature that you have access to while you're in edit mode. So that's Extrude. That can be a lot of fun if you even are working on multiple surfaces. Then you can pull out more than one at a time and have kind of fun with it. Some other options that we have under the Add command, again, may be useful to you. One of them is called Subdivide. This one's really good if you need to add more detail to a region of your model where there's not enough polygons. So for instance, with this part of my model, I've got this giant rectangular form. And I can't really do much more with this rectangle other than move it around as a rectangle. But let's say that I wanted to change it into like a point at the center or round it off. The only way I'm going to be able to do that is if the polygon structure has more details. And the only way I can get more polygons is by adding them somehow. And so the Add command over here with Subdivide will let me do that. So I'm just going to select this big one. and I'm going to hit the subdivide button once. And notice that immediately it breaks it into 4 new little regions. And so now the cool thing with that is that now I can independently edit each of those pieces to reshape the model. If I switch selection modes to vertex, I can pull a point up in the center of it now that I couldn't do before. So little things like that become possible if you need to subdivide the model to get more detail out. You do want to be careful you don't have your entire human selected whenever you hit subdivide. You do that and you could crash Blender because your 3D model scan is already super dense in polygons, and the more you add in Blender, the slower that software gets, okay? So just be careful when you do that part. All right, so that's subdivide. You have other things in here like duplicate. A fun one in here are these ones that are called knife, select, or knife project. These actually allow you to cut a new polygon into the surface, and you can actually make it a custom shape. It's kind of cool. So with my image, I could take, I'm going to select with my face selection mode. I'm going to grab this face right here that I can see, nice and big. And I'm going to go down here to where it says knife. And I'm going to use it. And when you turn on knife mode, your mouse turns into what looks like a little X-Acto knife blade. And it only works on whatever surface you currently have selected. It's very specific like that. So you can't just go free cutting on anything on screen. But what you do is you move your mouse over the selected plane, and then it'll show a green square below it. And then you click to start where you want to start from. And it works kind of like the pen tool. So then you pull your mouse away and it has a little extension line. And then you can make a unique form across the surface. And if you hit return, it'll turn off the tool, but it will finish the task and separate the surface based on whatever cutout shape you did. It's kind of cool. What really makes that even more cool is that now I can select either of those, and I can do an edit on them. Like I could take this and extrude it, and now I've got a funky shape, right? I could even push it into the object a little bit if I wanted to make like an internal cutout instead. It's kind of fun. Another great thing about that knife tool is that if I'm working on a shape, I can also cut a unique hole out of the surface if I want to. And now I've got a hole there instead of just a cutout shape along the polygons. So knife is really kind of cool for stuff like that, to get those kind of unique cutouts. Now when you cut out, when you use it to cut out, it does delete the polygon hole and it makes it look like your model's hollow. You should just be aware of that feature when you use that tool for that, when you're cutting out a whole shape. But again, it's a pretty easy tool to use. You just start with a selected face, grab the tool, move over the selected area, and if you're going to cut out a hole, make it a whole shape, and enclose it by going to your start point, and then click return to OK the change, and you'll have a hole. Okay, so those are kind of your knifing tools. Those are kind of fun. Again, for details, right? Details. Other things you can access here, there's a remove button. So for any selected polygons on screen you may have, you can delete them with remove. So we can hit delete here from the remove section, and then it asks you what kind of deleting do you want to do. The most basic ones are the ones listed up here where it says vertices, edges, or faces. And so if you have a polygon selected that's a face, like I have on my screen, this little weird shaped polygon, that's called a face as well. So I'm going to click on faces under delete, and it deletes it and it leaves a hole behind it. And so I can literally cut out entire sections of my model to make a hole into it just by deleting actual polygons. They have other options that are underneath that, like dissolve, which actually, if you have multiple polygons selected, like if you need to delete more than one piece at a time, so if you go through and just hold down shift and grab like a handful and go back to delete, you can do other options here like dissolve faces. And what it will do is that it will take all those faces and mold them together into one singular new form, which is what you're seeing on my screen right now. So it took all 4 or 3 of what I had and flattened it into one face, which is kind of interesting. All right. So those are some new things that you have access to from the Tools panel, and that's all I really want to talk about from that area. For any one of these tools, you can also find them listed down below on your 3D menu under Mesh. So if you go down below where it says Mesh, you can click on that, and it has a complete listing of all those options and more down here. So you can access your transform commands, you can access all your extrude options, delete options, all of your vertice or face selection options are all listed down here. So you can find all that down below as well. All right. So that's working with edit mode. Again, that's for very specific detail editing where necessary, and it's a good place to work from when you're trying to delete media from your model that you may or may not need, if you've got specific needs like that. Like if you've got loose geometry floating off your model somewhere that you don't need, sometimes edit mode helps us to work on stuff like that. So for instance, if I don't want like this weird looking gnarled feature, right? From my bag that got scanned, or misscanned I should say, I could actually grab this whole thing and delete it. So what I'll do here, just to give an example, I'll use the select tool and I'll turn on circle select, and actually tell you what, I'm going to turn it off real quick, so I'll escape. If you're just trying to get rid of a big region, in Blender when you make selections, it only selects based on the angle that you see the polygon from. So it only selects things that are visible in your viewport. So everything I'm selecting right now is only visible from the viewport angle that I'm seeing the model at. If I want to get the back half of this selected, I have to rotate the model around normally. But if I know that I need to cut this whole chunk off, I can change this option down at the bottom on your menu. It's this little overlapping square with white dots on each corner. And this is your selection limiter. When it's turned on, you only select what you see. You turn it off, and then go back to your selection tool, and it selects straight through the model all the way out the other side. So it gets what's in front and all the way through to what's in back. So if you know that you need to absolutely delete a whole section of polygons without question, this can be a great tool to help clean up stuff real fast. So I'm going to grab all that, and I'm going to go to delete from my Tools tab, and I'm going to dissolve all the faces. It may not let me do dissolve on that. We'll see. I'm going to try. We'll see if it'll let me do any of them. Dissolving. Okay, maybe it won't let me. Limited dissolve. Kind of. Edge collapse. There it is. Okay. So I did edge collapse, and all that stuff went away, but the cool thing about edge collapse is that it seals the hole behind you, so it doesn't leave a giant goofy gap in your model. It just closes it shut. So that was using edge collapse from your delete menu. And again, that's really good if you're trying to get rid of crappy geometry, which again, from your scans, you may or may not have, but sometimes that's good to do. All right, so that's the edit mode. All right, so let's move on to the other mode that's listed in here. So go back down to your 3D menu and click on edit mode down there, and we're going to switch to the other mode, and this one's very fun to play in. It's called Sculpt mode. So switch to Sculpt mode from down below, and again, if you've been zoomed in on your model, you can zoom out now so you can see the whole thing. And Sculpt mode is the mode that they designed that's really commonly associated with character design, organic modeling, very much akin to what a 3D sculptor, somebody who might work with clay, will do with a model. So this is actually a really fun kind of tool to play with. In a lot of ways, it's kind of intuitive because you're just kind of working into the surface. So here's how this tool works. First things to notice. Number one, on the left, your tool tab has changed again, right? Now it is specific to this mode that we're in. So what we see on the tool tab is actually all the listings for the current brush that we're using inside of Blender for the Sculpt mode. And if we move our mouse out into our viewport window, you should notice a red faint circle around your mouse. And the cool stuff that can happen here is that we can actually click and drag with a brush over a selected model on screen and manipulate it. So if you start clicking and dragging on this model with this brush out, it will start to additively add this sort of weird, wormy, surface-looking structure into your model, depending on how close or how far away you are with the tool. Again, the red outline of the tool represents the radius of the affected area. So as you start to draw on it, you start to see that affected area get hit. Now you should notice some other interesting things happen with this tool. Again, it's very intuitive in the sense that you can do this anywhere, but you have to pay attention to one thing with the 3D model, is that it's only affecting your model on one axis. So if I was to spin my model around, or my scene, you may notice that it's only pulling out those ripples so far from my model. And I'm going to turn off my cyclorama for a minute from my outliner panel. There we go. A little more handy when I'm just trying to edit one thing on the screen right now. But you can kind of see where it's pulled out these weird ripples across the surface. And you just have to remember when you're editing a model, even in Sculpt mode, you need to rotate it and look around to see what you're missing. Like, sure, I pulled out some ripples there, but is it doing justice to the rest of the parts around it and at different angles? And if I rotate my model now and start painting over here, it's drawing those weird rippled forms at a different angle now.
So why is it reflecting it?
Yeah, I'll talk about that in just a second. So one of the effects that this tool has turned on by default is something called symmetry lock. Symmetry lock is typically turned on for sculpting, and it's actually a tool designed for, again, character modelers. So what it does is that if you start designing or sculpting out of a model, it literally will mirror whatever you're doing on the other side. So if you wanted to make a human face, you would only have to make one side of it, and the other side would be designed automatically as you go. Pretty cool, right? That's kind of an advantage of creating with this kind of tool. So like I said, a lot of people use it to make symmetrical body forms or models, and that's the fastest way to do it, is having that symmetry locked down. So it makes, if you're making one arm on one side, then it's going to make the other one automatically on the other side exactly the same except mirrored. Now we'll look at turning that tool off to manipulate that. But just so you can see how this tool works real quickly, with the basic brush and not changing any settings, you can very quickly render some differentiated results on across the top of your model. Now let's actually look at the brush options in the tool tab on the left side of the screen to work on manipulation of this thing. So we're going to fine tune the way the brush works. So first off, what we have below the representative icon for what the brush looks like, there's an option that says radius. And this is actually a radius slider. So if you click and drag inside that gray bar for radius, you can adjust the value or the size of your brush tool inside the environment. So if I drag the radius of my brush up, suddenly I have a giant circle to work with. This is dependent on what size you are zoomed in on your model as well. If you're zoomed in closer, a giant brush isn't going to make nearly as big of an impact. But if you're zoomed out, the whole thing gets changed. So I just made my dude like fat. So you can kind of see how this thing can do stuff like that very quickly. He actually kind of looks a little bit, maybe he's pregnant, I don't know. But that's what radius does. It will change literally the outline radius of your brush. Strength changes the amount of power that your brush exerts each time you click it. So a higher strength level means that you will yield an instant result from your brush a lot faster based on the effect of the tool. So it gets enhanced a little bit more if it has a high strength versus a low strength, which gives you very subtle variations. All right, so those are two good ones to know about. If you slide down a little, there's a couple options here like add or subtract. They do exactly as they say. Add is what you've been using, so it builds up on top of the surface continuously. Subtract will carve into it and use your tool in an opposite sort of operating fashion. So it will literally press inward towards the center of your model any polygons that you're currently working on. The Sculpt tool, again, on a default model without changing anything, the detail of your model, it works by default with just the existing polygons that are available, so it won't recreate new ones. It just pushes and stretches them. However, we can change the way it does that. We can actually tell it as it carves to create more detail so that the brush tool actually makes more accurate changes to the surface. So for instance, if I want to carve a shape into my bag here on the side, I'm going to go down in my brush options down to the drop down that says DYN Topo, D-Y-N Topo. That's actually short for dynamic topology. So click on that and click the button that says Enable Dyne Topo. And what this does is it gives you a detail size setting right below that button you just clicked. The smaller that button is, the higher level of detail you can carve into your object at a time. So I'm going to drop it down to like 1 pixel for detail size. And then I'm going to zoom into my bag here. And I'm just going to make sure the strength of my brush tool is at about 50%. And then I'm going to start carving into the surface. And so now, I can actually like put my initials. And it's pretty darn detailed. That's what dynamic topology allows you to do is, again, as it carves, it adds more polygons to make it look super detailed. So now if I make like changes in the model with a broader brush, it will carve them very smoothly. It won't be so rough looking. So it's very nice. This will make a much nicer, much smoother line. Again, it is increasing the size of your model as you do that in those places where you click and drag. But again, it allows you to make more smooth kind of brush transitions across the surface. So that's an excellent tool to have turned on when using to do a lot of detail carving on the surface.
So where's the, how do you change it to make the small, like the radius?
Yeah, if you want to do like thin stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
you just change the radius up at the top.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just rolled the radius down. I made sure that the strength of the tool was turned up so that it could instantly carve deep into the surface without me needing to go over it more than one time. If I pump it up to, like if I pump the strength up really high, like to 0.9% and then start carving, the detail is, again, it's much heavier, much harder. So I can kind of make these weird worm tracks in the surface of my model. Kind of look veiny looking. But it's kind of cool that you can do stuff with it like that really quickly. All right, so that's working with dynamic topology. Great tool, great for detail. Again, great for smoother detail. Okay, so let's slide down to the last one that I want to show you. It's called Symmetry Lock. So expand the option for Symmetry Lock from your list. You may have to scroll up and down your tool brush tab to get to it. But expand Symmetry Lock. And Symmetry Lock, this is why whenever you draw on one side of the model, it ends up replicating the same design on the flip side of it in some way or form. But because we have one of our axis options mirrored, see how X is turned on? Every time that I carve into the surface with my tool, it mirrors it on the opposite side of the axis because of that. So if I turn off X, now if I carve into the model, it only happens wherever I'm actually clicking and it's not mirroring it somewhere else on the other side. But the cool thing is if you turn on X, if you turn on more than one, like let's do X and Y, and if I start carving, so it'll start doing it on both sides. See, it's starting to do it over there. It usually will do it in 2 other places. If I turn on Z, it'll probably do it in a 3rd place on the model. So yeah. So it's kind of drawing on the legs and up on the upper body of the character. Kind of creating this weird kind of blobby material out of my character very, very quickly. But mirror lock can help out with stuff like that. And sometimes that's fun to play with when you want to replicate an effect around the model very quickly. All right. So that's working with symmetry lock. You can turn that off if you don't want it to mirror the effect all around the model. Just deactivate whatever axis. So it shouldn't be dark shaded if you want it off. Okay. Now that we've seen that stuff, let's actually change the brush tool because this is the default one. It's called Sculpt Draw up at the top. Click on the icon image for your brush up there at the very top. And when you click on that, it opens up to kind of a little host of separate brush tools that you can use to manipulate your model. So these are really cool. Like, again, we just used the basic one. Other ones make very specific shapes like blob. If I use blob, it will now make kind of these weird bubble structures around my object. You switch from blob, you can also check out, like, they have clay, which is just kind of one that you can sort of mash around gently. Some that get you other extreme effects, like grab. Grab will literally let you click and drag out a selection of polygons. You have to keep in mind when you're editing, remember that you may have to rotate your model around because right now, when I use grab, it stretches in one direction. So see what it did? It stretched out these weird flat wings. Maybe that's what you need, but just be aware that's what it's doing when you do that stuff. So that's that feature. And again, they look really smooth because I have dynamic topology turned on. If I didn't, this would all look really angular and polygonish. So that's grab. Another one that's kind of fun is snake hook. If you click and drag on a piece of your model with snake hook, it will literally extend and take these out into space to make these kind of bizarre forms. So it's kind of another fun one to play off of. Cool thing is that when you grab one part, then you can also extend out more. You can start making these very odd looking shapes and things. And there's others that do similar things. Ones that you probably don't want to play with, like where it says F mask. Some of those are a little harder to work with. They don't give you immediate results. So I don't necessarily recommend those. The ones that are gray or red are the easiest to work with, though. All right. So that's how you can play around inside of Sculpt mode. Again, this is probably the most organic, sort of flexible creation tool inside of Blender on purpose. So it doesn't do direct editing or specific editing like edit mode does, but it does allow you to do a lot of very organic features very quickly. All right, so that's going to kind of conclude our first little video on tackling the different modes. So I'm going to stop that right here, and then we'll pick up again and look at some of the special shapes that you can add to your scene and how to work with them.